of Milarepa, and he met Milarepa in a place which is not too far from here, a place called Bhaktapur. And in Bhaktapur he received a teaching from Milarepa, and then at the end of the teaching session he said to Milarepa, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. I'm just going to go home and check on my wife and kids now. At which point Milarepa admonished him, saying, if you're really going to practice something, do it now. Don't put it off until tomorrow, because who knows whether you'll actually wish to kind of practice it tomorrow. So here it's imperative to seize the moment, and within that then practice the teachings which we've received. Now in terms of us Tibetans then, we know about the Dharma, and we know about kind of the kind of different types of practice that we should engage in. However, when it comes to reflecting upon the impermanence of things, then we are somewhat wanting. Wanting in the sense that occasionally we bring to mind the notion of impermanence and reflecting thereupon. But most of the time we find ourselves caught up in procrastination. So here it's imperative then to seize the moment, to reflect upon one's mortality, one's impermanence, how much time has already gone past and how much time we have left. Because again, if we look back at Kamtrul Rinpoche's advice, there's not much time left. So in terms of the life we've spent, the lifespan we have left, we should try to utilize it then for practicing the teachings then that we've received.
Tendendo te Kurang pe hada chilen, ta sangni de kalala rimba gogu mandu se ba nang chin, teni Kurang tropo da nang mitin zo kanga ke tang tin, tende sakanji yapuchi do sangni kalala pesha leng mandu se lavres, te Kurang zo kanga le ne, teni ti sangni te la kala se, order mangbo tang kala mangbo se, tende che shu ne, teni sakanda bo ke yopo la 이게 빌트인에 배샤던데 내가 자체 바부도스 템버와 텐드 디 카르레세도 디 초랑 그 드링 사마사송아 디 름바레세도 아니 되기면 친족데 이게 나라 되는 상니 칼라라 름바 먹고스 랍도 와서 랍레스 디 진다들레 요데 친족 가른 요다도 가르차송서도 되는 그 배샤를 한 것도서 나 배샤 되기면서 가르에서는 친족 얘기 뒤도 와서 상니 칼라라 름바 먹고스 뒤도 와서 텐데링 라비오스 추페다 상니 칼라를 럼바 먹고 라요 마도 디링 칼라를 럼바 먹고 라메스 어떻게 다가라와 디링 먹고 라요 마라 그 뛰고 중버래 되니 상니 세야데 용야요 마라와 tomorrow mañana it never come mañana 텐데도 미디게 가르라비오스는 그 장보러 와서 간다 보대 상니 칼라를 름바 먹고도 상니데 가도야나 상니 자대그래마도 대링 용하지요 말아 능주 낭박의 법인 낭박의 취재해야 돼 상니 정가로와 땅가 슈마 제게 인사는 되는 니마 정은주 토바드마 살 보고도와 된데도 상니데만로 받지 고고요래.
So it's like an example of a story or a joke which I heard. So in Lhasa, in Tibet, there was a restaurant, and in the restaurant there was a notice board that said, we don't need payment for tomorrow's food. And so then one man went there and he saw this and he said, oh great, that means tomorrow all the food is free. So he went out and he found his friends and his family and he said, oh, there's this wonderful restaurant and the food is all going to be given for free tomorrow. And so then the next day they all piled into the restaurant and they started ordering food left, right and center and had this incredible banquet. And at the end of it then the restaurant owner came out and presented them with the bill. And the gentleman said, what's this? Why are you giving me a bill? He said, the food is free today. And he said, no it's not. What gave you that idea? He said, on the notice board it said there's no charge for tomorrow's food. And he said, that's right, there is no charge for tomorrow's food, but there's a charge for today's food. So what this means is that tomorrow actually never comes. If you continually procrastinate, saying, I'll do it tomorrow, you're continually putting something off that will never actually come.
Today, the Chetang Tata, the young, the Tuba of Kashin, the Laya, the Tumba Jareke, Lomata Zotanji, Dunji, Sabajoba, Chipji Jabdujoba, Wembereson, Salon Totani, but Tamchi, Shata Imbate, Daji, then Carres and Chunde, send the Gang one to Sumba, the Naming one to Masumba, Dubdeng Janga, that in the Yungur. Tinsango to Lutub Shida Teneta Shida Mea, the Carres and Naransu, Yamlin Chetonda Jeda, Naransu Gutsundu Dabota, Tendela Redo Yoremato, Tata Juba Teda, Dama Teda, Menga, Kande, Tonsun Kugone, Tata Shal Jugimbare, in a Naransu Gun Manjune, to top down, Tende Chichi Tamba Manjun, Jun Matupate, Tende Mendo Sangudo, Tende into Naransu, Techachi, Zobanda Jeda. Ninjunda Jeda, Deya Sishuku Wang the Masomba, Tende Goyate, Kalchevu Mendo Sangudo.
So, like the students of Tsangpa Gyari who would then receive their instructions on the preliminary or the actual practices, and then will go away to isolated places and practice them until they achieve that realization, then it's imperative that we should try to emulate their example. So these days we may say, amongst ourselves, amongst our friends, there's not the siddhas of old, meaning that there's not those individuals who display the kind of miraculous powers as the masters of old, or perhaps there are not the signs of accomplishment in one's own practice or in one's kind of friends or sanghas practice. And if we wonder why that is, there can only be two faults. One is a fault with the Dhamma, or there is one with the fault of the application of the Dhamma. So if we think of the Dhamma in and of itself, this is the same Dhamma that was practiced by the masters of old. In dependence upon these instructions, then the masters of old achieved such wonderful signs of accomplishment. But if we look at the present day practitioners, in light of the practitioners of old, they are wanting somewhat. So here it's imperative that if we want to have the same spiritual realization or accomplishment as the kind of lineage masters or the masters of old, that we try to emulate them by exerting at least an equal amount of effort in our practice.
Teni Patamba Sanji Kaya Chi Yomba Pomo Chosan, Chiba Unyamundo, Chiba Tobab to Chojung Do, so Naranzo, Mambuchi Chunyambu Linche Dunzam, Teni Haha, the Ho, Teni Chibo Gabo Mambuton, Debit the Kaptela. Chiva Mataba Sayate, Yunyak, Samba Dingla, no one that you Yomare. The Yina and Chiva Matabate, tops Yungre Mato, Coco Tabdin, the Chimboche Chene, Yungumare son, the Tendesung Dua, Tendin Chiva Matapatea, there's a Samno Corgoyache, Insare, Sanji Jumden, they can doganala, Jen Tamchikan, Langbochi, Jentin Chodu in Bacheto, Gom Tamchikan on the Mataba Gombate, Gom Kangakan on the Chodu Chupa Yin Song to do Naranzo. Matapateche Tachi, Jula, Jevainaya, Chula Kurmanda, the Yungu Yosare.
So it's imperative to kind of reflect on the words of Patampa Sangye, where he would say that that which would really drive his Dhamma practice was then the reflection upon impermanence, and that was something that didn't arise continually, but something that he had to make effort at. So in the same way, in the sutras, the Buddha Shakymuni mentioned that amongst all the kind of footprints that can be left in the jungle, the greatest is the elephants. And amongst all the kind of contemplations or meditations, that upon impermanence is the strongest.
Kaduina, Labdeya, Botere. Tende to Tanking Hun and Dunang, Taji Sabjin, about Sujutere, Saja Chimbo, Nadinte, Shadake, Pento Chimbo Race, and Tende Sungudu, Penasinge, Lupola Zalta Den Sumbachela, Tini make Meba at the paint over Mari to make the Demba de Gugu Yore. Nadinte, Nate Carres and Sancho Sem Gomba, around Lakur Gomba. Tene Lamala Tepa the Mugu Gomba, Matopa Tawa Gomba, G Moa the Monlam Jindip Sepata Chete, Napote, Saje Chimbo, Nadi, Tendesung Nangado. Tati Naganan, Tambo, Sancho Sem Seateta, Gindupa Nambala, Shumagoba Nachire, 감각은 친이진바래 산초지 셈세야데 간데지 임바데 이나야 따와라 산초지 셈 하마공에 게레리니레 요나 진주구왕도 제야다 지 양면나 나딘시도 코 삽지나라 대 여바인데 제 휴야나 제바 메바레 된데인데 산초 셈지 따포라 임빈지 주토 마지나 총하면 우르치면 좀ပဲ셈 혼돈들라 nenden주 송바레 산초지 셈데 산초지 셈데 나랑 준다냐 따포진 시제레 따포진 야포지 요나 대자네 랑 가난 도나야 같이 나도 메바 립도 그래 스고레 대전도 산초지 셈다 단단하잖아 따 라고 보면도 산초지 셈데 마시디시 카르나 시제 베 데본다지 레 라본다지 조건다 다 사다 야고지 요나 마시디시 카지 동는도나 되네 레 라본다지 랩도 그러와 대인도 산초지 셈데 따다이난다 랑보지이난다 가르이난다 다티 내가 책을 숨고요래.
So then, if one can reflect upon these kind of preliminaries, that will aid then one's contemplation or one's practice of the actual Dharma that one is trying to practice. So here then, in terms of the Kagyu tradition in general, or the Drukpa Kagyu tradition in particular then, one tries to practice, or one all practices then the Great Seal, or the Mahamudra. And in terms of the outline of the previous Kamtrun Bese then, there is this five-fold aspect of the Mahamudra. So if we look at the outline, these 5 points then are initially the reflections or meditation upon bodhicitta, and then meditating upon one's form or oneself as a divinity, or that is to say the generation stage practice. Then there is the third outline, which is having kind of faith and devotion towards one's spiritual master. The fourth outline is the meditation on non-thought. And then the last outline is that of dedication and kind of prayer. So from within these 5, then the first outline is that of bodhicitta. So bodhicitta then is the kind of the incredible or the most amazing attitude or mindset which one can have. It is said to be like a pulley, or a kind of a strong rope, or a strong kind of pulley, which then pulls one up through the various grounds and paths of one's spiritual practice. It is also like the kind of smooth ride which carries one, or kind of guides one then to the state of complete and perfect Buddhahood. So these then are, this is some of the qualities of then bodhicitta.
Pallinji Dewanzo Tamji, Jobe Jeboro Jeba Juji, Tayan Dola, Pindi Sepa, Paldin Rubi Jaldun Chopambo. Tinde Induta, Sanchoji Sem, the Jasi Chembo Shevala, Jasi Sancho Sembe Chopalan Jupana, Shindu Neje Jipitsojuguni Yore. Tengaranzu sheda nambanda jina te kanga kan chinjimbare tendre ba mai ba ta ji gindu ba da chuma tendo na sanchu chunju de da domsum namba ni chamje thanaya je zito manana je choga sale jigu jigu thola tene chimbaina tene je karese gore je te chaje kangan thegre samgodo kanga je da theya da khariyo Digre Tenaya, then Sanchoji Semji Konda, Sosu Tarbe Domba, Sancho Sembe Domba, Sanwang Haji, Domsum Kokote, Raran Sosu Chulu Sosu La Domsum Ganamia Yore, Tendela, Naranzu Rabju Sungwa Kanga Kete, Chordun Nana, the Yaku Yore. Teni Chonju Nana Shivalake, Sancho Sentin Dorduna, Namba Nisu Shibzate, Sancho Humbe Sentan, and Sancho Jupani, no, Sancho Sente Sota, Dorduba Jena. Ni kong dugre songbar ni de karre sana momba semji dan juba semji namba ni de songbar.
So in terms of understanding and appreciating bodhicitta, one should turn to the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life by Shantideva, and I request that those of you who have the opportunity to read and kind of contemplate, meditate upon this wonderful book, within which then the great kind of examples of bodhicitta are given. So in addition to that, those monastics who are gathered here, it's imperative that not only do you reflect upon the guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, but you ground that in the understanding of the 3 vows. So then here then, the 3 vows refer to then the vows of individual liberation, the monks and nuns vows, if you will, the Bodhisattva vows, and then the kind of tantric vows. So within Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we find that within the traditions there are various explanations of the 3 sets of vows. So whichever one is available to you, then I think it's imperative that you get that and you read it and you contemplate on it and you try to hold whatever vows you possess in a perfect way. And then you complement that grounding with then the attitude of the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Shantideva's book. So this is extremely important. I'd like to emphasize that this should, for every monastic, be the kind of basis of one's spiritual life. It shouldn't just be then performing rituals and doing pujas and prayers and things. Rather, one should ground oneself in the understanding of the 3 vows and in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So within the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Shantideva mentions that of the bodhicitta, there are 2 types, that of bodhicitta of aspiration and bodhicitta of engagement. So we may say that there are varying types or various levels of bodhicitta, but in essence then, there are 2 types, that of aspiring bodhicitta and engaged bodhicitta.
Mingpa Simchen Karchi make go sen, Jirumbochi, Jumdre Manga Dundin Yorova, Telato Yungo Yore, Jumdre Manga Dundin to Mashipa, Tin Tempa, Tinsova, Tin Goa Yongo Samba, Ninge Geneta, then some Ninji Kakasen, Dunchago Yojere, Donna attended Jumdre Manga Dundin Gone, Simchen Tamjing Arank, Pama Maziba, Jejamendo, Tari Paman the Sotamji, comes on Corbu Dunhala, then de Kanga Dunga, Yon do Ngake. Di Pama Simjin Don Seke Gundo, and Ningi Chimboka, Simjin La Maine, Dini Shirap Chimboka, Ya, Number Tamjin Chimba Satella, Ya Maine, Dini Simjita Tamjin, Coronson Corb Dunghale Dranduke, Lodechi, De Lojidu, that Corbu Dunghale Dragona, that Sanji Matobna, Yang Tabaji, Dramatoba Indu, Sanji Tunduku, Lo Teje Yore. Rani Chiputondala Sanjindu, the Loyuna, the Yamping Sem Marawa, Yamping Sem Mena, Sancho Simba Chago Yomari, Sancho Semia Chago Yomar, Tendi Indu, Mina number neither Dembakagone, Hoba Simchi Goguris.
So in terms of the bodhicitta of aspiration and engagement, then it's imperative to understand what is meant by aspiration and what is meant by engagement, what is one to actually engage in. So here in terms of aspiration, what one aspires to is to achieve the state of complete and perfect Buddhahood. And why is that? To benefit all sentient beings. So technically then, one would say that viewing sentient beings, one aspires to achieve the state of complete and perfect Buddhahood for their sake. The way to come to such a conclusion is by relying upon then the 6 cause and 1 effect method of bringing about a kind of a bodhicitta within one. So here then, one views all sentient beings and recognizing that since beginningless time one has taken a rebirth in then the cycle of existence, and at every time one was born to a set of parents who were as kind to one as one's parents of this life. And then thinking of how one would repay the kindness shown to one by the kindness of one's parents in this life, one adds that to, or one views each and every sentient being in a similar way. So in terms of the outline then, one recognizes each and every sentient being as having been one's kind parent sentient beings at one time or another, reflecting on the kindness that they showed one at the time of being one's parents, and then how is proper to them repay that kindness. Meditating then on the kind of love, wishing them to have happiness and the cause of happiness, wishing them to be free of suffering and the causes of suffering, which is then compassion, and then thinking, how am I actually able to bring about the complete abandonment of not only negative circumstance, but the cause thereof. How to bring about then this happiness that sentient beings so desire, and the cause thereof. In fact, there's no way to bring this about unless I myself become Buddha. So here then one has this special intention to then, for the benefit of all sentient beings, achieve the state of complete and perfect Buddhahood. Thus then, viewing all sentient beings, recognizing all sentient beings as having been one's mother, remembering their kindness, wishing to repay, meditating on love, compassion, and then this special intent, seeking then to achieve the state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings, is then the meditation of aspiring bodhicitta.
Tene Drukpa senjute, tene jok seyate, tene lam paru de sambatola, mus laling to tar, mus laling nzi pick up tela, Drukpa senche segure. Ti Mumba and Jupani te pete sancho, simbe chopalan Jupanola, rover dot and rovaye, sebra chitter shipatar, tivjing kepin dinage, sebra remji shiparsas. Ne Plasa Tavanda chela, rang. Ron doppel loci yore, te Mumba chadi yore, Plasa Tavola, Musu combat ding joke, Pena Relemota Namru Rabo Karina yang Musun Dovate, Juba Senchire, Juba de la Lamparo de Samba Tro yore, Paro de Samba Tro de Nyamni Sepala tene, Chuku de Zukuni Botin Rugu yore, Lam Tela tene, Juchago yore, Lam Tela tene, Juchadu. Pena Sancho Samba Namche, Yamling Zumundate, Sancho Semdea, Ti, a Chago Yore, Cheresana, Tambichu, Uman Jupaganala, Padi Dawatabake, Zenso Chusum the Pamochi, Devership Chimbanala, Sonam Shizit Dani, Sancho Zojidani, Kuiju, somebody. Zimbada Sutenda, Zopala, Sopa Chusumbote, Sanje Zo, Chimbetenjin Layores, Sumbares. The Chavan Marda, Chavachaya Mare, and Habares, Telatene, Sanjik, Kunamba Nikonon, Zukutin Dugure, Sungure, Tati Pechate Kodo Gore, Zunso Chisum the Da Pamoche, Devership, Rabzonam Lama, Yishi Shizitsoja, Tadani, Sanji Chujidani, Kujus, and the Chek Karsagore, something, Gom Yamni Cheanda Botan. Shirap Chimbok, Chukanelo Sedon Sejeva La Sopata, that Tenzikanam Yatan and also Rabdosumaka Yamni, so Imbalagona, Sanjik Rabzon Havares, Teletena, Tubza Karutugores, Chukundugures, so Nigan Carres and Yishires and Tendesondu, Lamparo de Sambato, La Labjete, Juba Semchi Segures.
So, in terms of the engaged bodhicitta, that which the Bodhisattva engages in is the practice of the 6 perfections. So, in terms of engaging in the 6 perfections, as is mentioned in Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, that one should know the difference between aspiring and engaged bodhicitta by the analogy of wishing to go somewhere and then actually traveling there. So here, in terms of wishing to go somewhere, one can wish from one's armchair, but in terms of actually going there, one needs to make the kind of preparations that would kind of propel one there. So in terms of these 6 perfections then, these are that which would lead one to then achieving the form and then the truth bodies of the Buddha, the enlightened one. As is mentioned by Chandakirti in his introduction to the Middle Way, that by engaging then in the practices of patience and effort and ethical discipline or morality, then one creates the causes which ultimately ripen then as the form body of the Buddha. In terms of the other perfect actions, that of samadhi and wisdom, these are said to be then the activities that the Buddha, that the followers of the Buddha, the monastic followers of the Buddha, then should then engage in. These ultimately ripen then as wisdom, and the wisdom finds its fulfillment or its completion then in the truth body of the Buddha. So in terms of actually achieving Buddhahood, one achieves it then through traversing the path of the 6 perfections.
Tende in the Mumba and Jupani, Tetan Dor Dudure, Jepashena Shea Yore, Karesena Nambani Shutsani Zache, Pedro Chusum Jigone, Sene Shegi Yore, Pena, Teyang Sasir Davame, Terdaran Chinjung, so Dojire Menshini, Yijin or Yamalo, jalponzo dan lambochi yomako michudane ranin chubo tenamje namba nishu tsani sosan semji nishu tsani tsamje he yore ta tezo pedro chusomje gone chene pe satabe senje de chujin sene tande chene chukapo tambe chu karbo thamji jebe jiten yente sene dubzi chuko na te tabzo ko na tende chede ta mangbo yore te tereng he mago ba chene tende semji la yena nishu tsani yore so duduna momba den juba nyena la dugu yore ndor chuduna sanchoji sem chayate yemping ki sem chela segi yore ngaran chuku mitsuka namji labde o khoda pe me yako yore khoda sanchu sambare yendal pen pe tagre segi dowa tende yen la pen to ko lo yong che gogu yore yen la pen sem che lo yona sanchu sambare rangdong tonye chonga te de na te sanchu samba lagu marwa pen sacha ke shenpa yibra ka nong la tsen de la shen na chupa me dadong la shen na sansen me sungu dowa sacha ki shenpa yibra ka nong rang tonda tsen de me tsen di ka tonda jipo yungya che de rang tonda chung sam de na ti che ko ngon char ya ya che yo marwa tunru tunzu ka rang dung rob de girwa ngaru nashi tonggo de de men chini chang rab de sungba che rang dung chonga de dadong chonga rob de na tel che ngon char ya ya che yo ma de da che 두숨가 칼라티 돈로가 라도고 여러분 저 증원 차려면 당가론조 담주 조지데 덴베 밀루름 보치데 투드치 잠블링 데네 레차도 치 제제요 반다치 고그로 봐 찍대 차치 고그레마도 치셔바나시 시송바에네 마중바레 덴데 인도 찍다 산초지 센시야던 dor츠드나 셈진 옌라 펜바요 바지 펜셈요 바지 고그 당 무스 펜 고그레스네 대야 차고 말에 저래장 안주 nangpa sanji pade semtsu naba rema to nguzo naba marwa zambuling la chulu tumta mangbu chi yore ngupo tsuo jengi mangbu chi yore ngunzo ngupo tsuo jegi mare ngunzo nangpa sanji pade sem tsuo re samba gedame ki sebdale gede zuni checho ji mandang samba zangna sata lamya zang samba ngena sata lamya nge tamchi samba tala rale pe tebe samba zungla mbeper chi sungu duwa ngunzo samba la rale ki yo ma ngupo slok pamjorta slok tunjin la rale nge ki chulu chi mare ngaransu tende indu tangna sanchu samba sayate kararesene yen pensem yopatela sanchu samba lago yores.
So as I mentioned, this aspiring and the engaged bodhicitta is the kind of gross way of differentiating bodhicitta. In terms of the different types of bodhicitta, we can talk about the 22 different types or the 13 examples, such as the gold, the king, the elephant, the white, etc. But here then, if one is to bring all of these different types of bodhicitta together, then we can say that there are two types, that of then the aspiring bodhicitta or the bodhicitta of aspiration, and then the engaged bodhicitta, within which one then engages in the practice of the six perfections. But anyway, in essence, if one is to say, if you could summarize bodhicitta, how would you surmise it? Here then, I would say that altruism, the wishing to benefit others, then, is the real heart of bodhicitta. So in general, when we are around the kind of Dharma scene, so to speak, then we meet people who are naturally very, very kind and very kind of helpful. And some people may even say, oh, look at this kind individual here. Aren't they helpful? Aren't they nice? Perhaps they are a bodhisattva. So they never say that to people who are grumpy and unhelpful and selfish, do they? So here, this is just reflecting on the quality of bodhicitta, which is this extreme of altruism, an altruism which then wishes to benefit each and every sentient being. So here, in terms of the bodhicitta that you may say then of essence, it's altruism, a wish to benefit others. As the Sakya masters in their mind training text known as Parting from the Four Attachments mentions, so if one has attachment to this life, one is not a Dharma practitioner. If one has attachment to one's own aims, then one is not a kind of bodhisattva. So here, in terms of being someone who is professing to practice the greater vehicle teaching, one should at least try to develop this good heart. As is mentioned then, if one's heart is good, then one's grounds and paths, that is to say the development of one's spiritual practice, will be good. If one's heart is bad, then the experiences one has will also be likewise experienced in a bad or in an unpleasant way. So here it's imperative to try to utilize then the 18 freedoms and endowments of this precious human body which we have, and utilize it in such a way as to give rise to then this extreme of altruism, then this real wish to bring about some benefit for anyone whom one encounters, or this mind of altruism.
Pena ngaranzu chije da buchajan Mother Teresa sengi ngaranzu kangan chingrawa muranke mechi rirpola sitsola shabse shuya tabota menkang da lobda da pama mengi bugu ke zinjong jeya da lo nepa lo gemba da nepa la sopa tato jeba Mother Teresa sene koron pen zambulang keda yong ki jimi tendere moran nangba imin da nga shida shigime ina yang Moranga chopa ta samba kono koyate sanchu simban chitama na shi yore tende indu sanchu simchi ke domba shun domba judin ke kansa yimi nga ha ko me ena ya sanchu simchi chona keche kin khob chona dombe nyamtha nam deshi namji se shi joza jenji te lam che be sabzan jorusna sheba la ke sanchu sim ke peyun no la sungwa na shi re tende indu sanchu sim de sula yona ya te sanchu simba yin song do Sancho Simbake, Lutin la Chipper Yomare, Lola Chipper Yomare, Natsula Chipper Yomare, Rayla Zangi Yomare, Rula Zangi Yomare, Sunda Jigajula, Lutin la Chipa the Pumiki Chipper Yomare, Sancho Sente Kanza, Sula Yonaya, Tini, main name John, Sancho Simbata, Ton name John, Jitin Lada Mata Chipatamchika, South of Nesu, Jugres and the Jassichin Bushiwalaka, John Junior Sungore. Tende indu ngaranzo sanchoji semde chaje chembo ko tawa gom dengi ke kanza yena ya nde med marong ba ke chala yenla chela chade ge yores.
So in terms of our kind of Buddhist outlook, we often talk about altruism and how wonderful it is, love, compassion, concern for others, etc. But in terms of practical application, sometimes we are left wanting. If we look around the world, we find a variety of philosophical or religious traditions, and within them we find, or more often than not, that the other religious traditions are much better at actually putting into practice that which we kind of profess or that which we kind of speak so much about. For example, if we look at Mother Teresa, she worked incredibly hard for the downtrodden and the kind of impoverished, building schools, hospitals, clinics, etc. So this is not something that only a few people know about. Rather, this is kind of renowned throughout the world of the altruistic kind of intentions and activity of Mother Teresa. So this is something well worth kind of taking into account, in the sense of ignoring her because, or that altruistic individual because they are not Buddhist. That's really rather foolish. So here, in terms of Mother Teresa, I do not think she was a Buddhist, but if you were to ask, is she a person who had the Bodhisattva vows, again, I can't really say. However, she is a person who engaged in the Bodhisattva conduct. Of that, there is no doubt, because she had this extreme of altruism, where she just worked solely and spent her whole life working continually for the downtrodden. As Shantideva mentions in his Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, in the section on the benefits of bodhicitta, one who engages in the conduct of a bodhisattva should certainly be regarded as such. So in just the same way then, when we see individuals, regardless of their particular background, whether it be whatever their ethnicity, whatever their kind of gender, whatever their age, etc., just ignoring that, rather looking at their conduct, if one sees this is in accordance with then the bodhisattva ideal, one should accord the individual the credit of being said type of individual. So this is extremely important. So for us who profess then to be practitioners of the Great Seal or Mahamudra, so this attitude, this extreme of altruism, this bodhicitta, should be something that we definitely have. For without it, we cannot practice the Great Seal correctly.
Tene che karase gorako sanjo sem de ta nenga chembo mare langin de suyo mare ngete nenga chembore labde de perna kenchin yenga rabunda cheina jonju gongola dusomje java thamshi shekshin jisi pe lamboche Aranchin, Sancho Jisem, Jobsi Chobor Tombas, Depe Sanje, Tatabe Sanje, Maumpe Sanje, Tusum Sanje Tamji, Sanje, Langwa Chimbudate, Carresena, Sancho Jisem, Lam de la Tene Sanje Yosungure. Sancho Jisem de la Matimba Sanje, Tabiore Sunjute, Konguson, Kade Tonsugo, Jagwe Chusungore. 당은좀 컴백게리데 근데 샘 상주 샘라 마템바 그 상제야 요래 생인지 미진도나 디카텔라 데네 동바 초고게 마장와데 그 장국으로서 공부 된데 송바래 디진도 그 빼나 유나 상지 드롭라 디초바 메나 상지 드롭라 탑착바 상지 루피 사원 마노르바 남다 상주 조도 샘제 도 송마르와 상지 드롭바 세팔라 요나 다 상주 선바 디랑 드기요레 메나 상주 선바데 메나 메탑 메바제레 다 사운다데 마노르바데 가르레선 상주지 샘롬보치데레 송구요르와 덴디인두 디인두 단당 은조까지 바게 사칭아데게 나라양 베나 상주 선지 따보라 연빈지 주토 마지나 촘하메 우르치 문정베 샘문돈데라 넨텐주 송바레 상주지 샘시야데 테마직 감 야야바 근드기요 말 니검 야야바 근드기요 말 뒤준도 나라서 상주 샘데다 만더바제 고구요레 딘데레 마토 그 지당 나랑수 가도이나 상주 지 가는서 거라 톰롱 니메트나 치피조 쟁이 토도 바나 타마와세야 제로 여러와 나랑수 조고 안랑 니마다 주 셈바 지보요나 강가 상주 선바 난신다 지 벤좀뭐 강가 야군다 지 랑나 쟁이 바지 토도 바요나 되는 그 도도 난신다 제레다 그 다가자 그런 된데 용거래 된데도 상주 생정도 가드이나 고야지 기잘라지 레마도 다가자 부디 간라데 좀세 땡 인데지 되다 지 상주 선바 맨도 삼삼다 요래데 쟁이 바지 토를 밥이오나 대두 대대 마지바고 그래서 배나 집수 밀라그 남타나라 로동다 달로니 그 차도 그 쪼바 집에 값수 되네 로동 말외 공게 주 이제때 만나봐 담진 고거데 에 카나네 담비추 책진 던지 매발라 감가르 춘된데 사나 가사레서 타바파라 강 집주게 샬레른 춘데 집주 샬은 좀바탄데 탈라데 파시시제도 레충바게 니 라마게 꾸이 바부 참모장야 모도발라 라미 꿀라 도바데 마드나 상하게 자동는 조그레산데 벨까지 쳇네로 레충바 집주 몰라게 레충 마지 송네 되네 르파 찬데 군고송송아 르파 찬데 군고송도 빼나 콘트로 사용도 조바데 감고고 요래 저고도 용도 칼라데 사고고 요래 장용도 글로데 공고고 요래 두수 그런 거 돌 빼나 텐데인도 나랑도 남주 상주 선반난 시제 랑진 정말로 요래 좀뭐 요래 찡님 바제 토도 봐도 된은주 상주 셈데지 조바데야지 되네 지고 타마반난 시 차로고 요래 텐데 만도 바제 다다 딜라 넨텐 조스야지 다다 nga 사칭 아딘 그 상주지 셈네데 셈 상주 셈들라 넨텐 조스야데 다 가두이나 마지 바제 고군도 우수야 되래 is too much
So I've been talking about the benefits of bodhicitta quite a lot, but I don't think one can ever underestimate how important bodhicitta is. As such, Khenpo Shenga writes at the beginning of his presentation or of his commentary, interlinear commentary on the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, saying that this is the expressway to Buddhahood that the Buddhas of the three times have traversed, meaning Buddhas of the past, the Buddhas of the present, and the Buddhas of the future. All of them will have to go across this path, generating bodhicitta, practicing it, sustaining it, having it with them at all times. And for it is this that gives rise to then the state of complete and perfect Buddhahood. If this causal seed isn't present, then it's impossible to achieve the state of Buddhahood. And Khenpo Shenga goes on to write, even if one is to profess, if there is a method of achieving Buddhahood without bodhicitta, such an individual who professes such is just, to put it politely speaking, nonsense. So here, basically then, if one would like to achieve the state of complete and perfect Buddhahood, then one needs to give rise to the attitude of a bodhicitta in such a way that it remains continually with one. What does that exactly mean? So in general, when we are have a full stomach and we're sitting in a nice place and the sun's shining, and perhaps we sit up straight and think to ourselves, I'm a great bodhisattva practicing such and such a spiritual tradition. And perhaps that's a good thing to do. However, when difficult circumstances arise, then we forget our practice of patience, we forget the very notion of altruism or bodhicitta, and we become worse than an ordinary fellow. So here then, this is a completely wrong way of doing things. Here one needs to continually familiarize oneself with the attitude of bodhicitta so that it remains with one continually, not just on nice hot sunny days when one's had something nice to eat, etc., but during the difficult times it should be the attitude of bodhicitta that carries one through those difficult times. And it is in dependence upon this that we should experience every aspect of our spiritual life or of our spiritual kind of practice. So as such then, we will be able to kind of swiftly achieve then the state of complete and perfect Buddhahood. If we neglect this fundamental to then one's spiritual practice, then it is as if we are kind of ruining the seed but expecting the result to occur. So for this reason then, in the beginning of the fivefold Mahamudra, this bodhicitta is given precedence, and it's imperative that as much as possible then we should try to emulate this. If we need sustenance for our inspiration, then one can look in the dialogues between Milarepa and Rechungpa, within which then, Milarepa would say to kind of Rechungpa continually that it's imperative that he kind of practice patience and not give in to kind of anger or hostility, etc. But rather than, even if somebody was bringing harm to him or his spiritual teacher, he should still address them with an attitude of patience. Within the aspect or within the attitude then of bodhicitta, one should kind of address others, whether they are forceful or whether they are pleasant towards one. One should be unwavering in one's resolve to then adhere to and meditate upon bodhicitta. Of course, this doesn't mean that one should neglect what we need. When we are hungry, we should eat something. When we are cold, we should put on clothing, etc. If we are hot, we should move to a cold place, etc. But within doing all of those activities, we should do it within then the attitude of bodhicitta, never moving from that attitude, as it's the very kind of foundation or the very life force of our spiritual practice.
Tene tuchu mambung gosare tuchu shida mendo tende sem hundon de la nenten zo se sancho che sem che korte ta ndor dupanda che chena tagat samje shu tene ta nipa ngading ki nipa kana la jang ranglu jabel hakul lanjurme chi tensa ma se nang khandung khorbang mendo be lul hakun de la nenten zo se ta te cherem dal sungu yore ranglu jabel hakul la jurme chi tensa ma sina se yadate Chirtang ke ngarang chunjung kap tende gom jab gore se tende mangbo konyo gom jab tu khande jab gore se tende tudu yidam ko late chura imba chen gom gore te ngarang ke sam ache nga ke yidam ko lata kawain tende kan te gom thab da yosa mare nga pena pecha sholo ka che lo la zim na nga tende chucho mangbo ngondo ko to tene ngarang chunjung ko samno da chunjung kap ko pugu ko samno da tende je ngarang ko kokwa na la tene sopa che tende ne mangbo chin tan la sopa ta tende mangbo shang che namba mangbo thana ka namba de mo thema ba je yedam je la je chun jambe yong yin samna ta te kawa yung samare sambanda ngarang chunjung lo tende khornyo tedu chunjung kabla ten nangshi chije la sopa tende ne mikashin ka te debu mendu singye mangbo do tende mangbo do ranglu yedam ka la gomya de la tende ke samdengi mangbo chije tende yor ngarang chunjung kabla tende yo dada chunjung de da dagi me ngape yaku shi de yo ngan jikwa yinda sege me da ngarang taga rang la de yo tarung tende na yinte ena ya ranglu jabul la ku gam go gores jabul la ku gombte la jurme che tensa singo gores ngunju gom de den zamla sela masela yola mela da che nano rabrem da mangbo che ba da se thaju de thaju che chane muyong ba chen do wa de manjur ba che khadu yena tende gogore sungu yore jurme che tensa mazina khandung khorbang mendo pe sena madang khandro pawong khandro chuchung suma tam che khor du ba jam so ke tene argam bandam pu pe du pe ve ne tang khor du ne choba namba na zo bam buya te yungsa mare sungu yore tende indu tende drinking yore te ta ranglu de jabulaku ready yore te gamgo yores.
So that kind of concludes my brief kind of overview of bodhicitta. Of course, if we had the time, we could speak about this for many, many days, but we're rather constricted by the time, so I'll leave it there and move on to the second outline, or the second point of this five-fold or five-point Mahamudra instruction, which is to meditate upon oneself as a deity. So this then refers to the generation stage practice, where one meditates upon oneself as a divinity or in a divine form. So for this practice then, one needs some kind of criteria. Otherwise, the experience I had as a young boy maybe kind of shed some light on this. When I was a young boy, I was just learning kind of to read and write and memorizing a few lines of a text every day. And then I came across a passage which said, meditate upon yourself as a deity. So here, when we think about meditating on oneself as something really pure and divine, but when we look at ourselves in ordinary form, we are kind of made of flesh and bones, and when we think about the contents of our stomach and bowels, it's rather dirty and disgusting, isn't it? However, when we think of meditating upon, using this as the basis, and then meditating upon oneself as divine, seeing oneself as divine, it seems something which is almost impossible, or next to impossible, isn't it? This is not something which is unique to me. I've also, in my travels, encountered many individuals who've said, how do you actually meditate upon oneself as a divinity? How does that actually occur? Because we are made of flesh and blood, we are not divine, we are not made of light, etc. So here this requires that one needs the kind of very basic understanding of generating oneself as a deity, and after one has engaged in that understanding and is able to then sustain the kind of visualization, here in sustaining the visualization one no longer perceives oneself as ordinary, but rather as completely as the divinity, and then one, without fluctuating from that view, one sustains it through the force of one's meditation. Of course, there are the instructions that say that the more stable one's meditation, that is to say, the more stable one's meditation upon oneself in the divine form, the easier it is then for the dakas and dakinis of the sacred places to kind of gather around one. However, here it's very important then to know when one is practicing the generation stage, for example, meditating upon oneself as a manjushri or something, then to do this in a way which is unfluctuating or unchanging, something which is stable.
Tene lakpart tanda nganzo chuduk nyamlen da chedu tene phamo ko tongra gom ko go phamo ko tongra gam na thungkhor jab ko go nyabu thungkhor ta tende jabdu tene phamo la khatam ta kapala ta tene rupi jen ta tene sang sing mangbo yorwa ta pe ndang munjin chembo denjin chembo tanji chembo che gon tanzu jerem tanzu pe sarbon da che chen thungkhor jabdu nyabu thungkhor jab ne ka so tene khatam te ya madeba thoba te ya madeba tene chi sang sing ganga madeba da chen jab jam tende cha yore segido rangla da tende jerem sapo tende yo manyo tende madeva khaya mando pe devo do che shigi yo maro ate devo re jerem sarpo che ding tende madeva yosare ngak roka tende tung khashe yo daba khashe yo tenjo ke dubla la ya toding nambala nju tai jong toding mangbo yo re khonjo la ya shune ta jerem pe sarpo jon phamo ko jerem sarpo zone tende tungko jam nyalbu tungko sama yo ye pa phapne ta ni go go ni du tene phamo ko cherem gamdi yore tene khatam yore kapala yore rupi jenru yore ta tenso kanga tene sangi sangi chadu devo mundu segindo tende te madeva da hajang ko tende unji de denji tanji gogo marwa nangla rangji mado pa nangshi cheche pa cherem lams kan sal dagarang sha ten tungko jamnen de yosarete yang khashi tende chegyorwa tenan shi ngaraya chi ngarang 집준 잠배 용 나랑 되네 집주 좀만다고 제 감도 지금 맞대반다 제가 나다 가와이 텐데 삼고도데 대 제바요 말레스 꿈친 빼마까 보게 다다 라니 랑라 라니 라니 yen도 맞춰 제소데 라니 랑라 아세도 라데 나랑레서 마 덴데슈나 디거 나랑 야잔 라리 야잔한 디기요레 라니 랑라 라니 라서 야잔한 디기요레 라니 yen도 맞춰 제서 라 yen달요 말레스 라 최가라 연달 tsena chilol ma chosega churang semgung o churang rangji de lai rangji takba lai ko song to rangji la cha de yore dele ten zunghang tamji satung lai ko dada tamji jodrang ha ji da tento tamji rangji mimi tar se ya ke nang tong khari na ya langa yichi ju ro ba njam len ro ba kap ji yore wa ngaran chulo yore wa te yore ba sana jibu tamba ten chulo doga te mabde ba yoyin samare kumchi pema ka bo ka tata tende sungu yore ti sungba thon tega pena zok tongba wo tongba ni zok so sena zok khuran tongbu tongba ni res tongba ni te zok res tongba ni le zok ye mai no zok le tongba ni ye mai tongni yibzok ke rikpa ke gone tongba ni te ten la phadu tongni te le ngishi che bo che da tangni yang ta bo che cha go yore la gom de ta da kumchin pe ka go sungwa nan shi ke la ni rang la rang ni la ni yendo ma chup che se ya de ra wa जगह तो वो ऊपर वाला से करो ऊपर वाले से थोकल घरी हो रहे थोकल ची यो मारो मुसलमान तो अल्लाह से करो नाम नता दे करो कंगा के नारायण चो नंबा के घरी रहे से ना यो चु घरी यो ना था नारायण चो जुल छु यो रे धोंडा चलो लो यो मारे चलो ला घरचे ने में देने को दो सों दो थंगा दो आसन दिन सुनजी ला सिरो ला सुन पे तोंदा ला दमसुं को तोंदा ला दिन दे जी यो रे से जा रे मत 근데 칠로네 출래야지 말해 나랑 줄로 요대 받지래 근데 인도 제렘 건도 디 제렘 데라 문저박 댄사심 받지 센사심 받지 가두 감나 요받지 고고 요서래
So this notion of grasping onto the kind of ordinary aspects of one's being can then prevent the kind of meditation of the generation stage occurring well. One thinking that one is kind of ordinary and then not being able to kind of develop in the kind of divine kind of pride and stability of being the deity. However, this is not the only kind of deviation from the path of the generation stage. There are those individuals who practice the various yogic exercises, and for this then they have to have very stable practice of the generation stage. Now when one is sitting down, this can be something which is quite easy to achieve, but then when you get up and you start moving around, then it can be quite difficult. For example, in Tashjong we have many yogis who practice those exercises, and sometimes they have some kind of problem with their meditation, in the sense that they have to start doing these kind of yogas, but they are visualizing themselves in the form of Vajravarahi. So Vajravarahi has a Kadvanka staff, and she also has a knife and a skull cap and all these kind of bone ornaments, etc. And the individual who's practicing these yogas then says, well, what do I do with the skull cap when I'm jumping up and down, when I'm doing the beps and things? What do I do with the Kadvanka? When I'm moving here and there, do the kind of bone ornaments sway with me, or do they get in the way, etc.? So here this is grasping onto the kind of the form of the generation stage too much. So here it's imperative to nail the key point of the generation stage, which is, as Pema Karpo mentions in his writings, that oneself as the deity and the deity as oneself. So here then the essence of one's mind, the essence of oneself, if you will, is then the deity. There is no kind of deity outside of oneself. Of course, when one is training in the practice of the generation stage, it's okay to visualize that the Buddha is outside of oneself and dissolves into oneself, or that oneself dissolves into the deity outside, and then you have the merger of oneself and the deity and you stabilize that. But ultimately then, what the very nature of one's being, one's very essence is then indivisible from then the deity. And the way to train in this is not unique. Here then, if we look in the sutra section of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra, there is the saying that form is emptiness and emptiness is form. So here then the emptiness is not other than form, but rather it is of one taste or of one essence, essentially the same thing. So in the same way then, the essence of one's being, one's very nature is then the divinity, and it's a matter of then becoming familiar with that, stabilizing that, and then meditating within that. That is the way to then practice at the generation stage. Just as within the meditation on emptiness, one understands the emptiness of form, and understands that emptiness of form is none other than emptiness, and that emptiness is none other than form. The two are one and the same, if you will. So in just the same way, then one meditates upon one's nature, or upon one's essence as divine, and then one sustains that, or then kind of remains within that.
Tindian Jerem Seatella, Temba Topment of Jeren Salhan Temnatep, number Mambuji, that the Karsagoroko Tende Pala and Tamjunda and the Dagadogo, that in a Jalang that it is short the Kadu and Tamjunda Dagdu, Chichina and the Goyamentuti, Nunzu Pula, comes Kusola, Tayab Dundris and Day, Pemasikeda Chambochi. Kurang ke nyemba da tenda tongsun mangbo sa yaba tenda shindu ne cha top chembo chire de kurang shiren ka tenda monam lokpa jamne te kurang rel cha sung bare dayab dong de se te tema che khamba ga rang jo ta khamba ga pha khamso ke khamdur mo chi gonsa khamba ga le de de le bare de de le du tene khamdur mo chi kumchen trupa 템비님마세야 감 템비님마세 답에 공 두자 첨보래 미망보 그 감 템비님마다 하고 되기도 나 간에서도 나 감바가르 다시 좀 traverse 감 템비님마 레베 감 템비님마 텐데 라구래 템비님마 깨다 첨본다지 가리나 차래 공가된지 란데다 텐데는 노동 첨보 중화래 마도 템비님마 밀라 말아서 밀라 깨다 첨본데 Tenin Tata Tandortsuduna, Tayab Dundre, Tayab Dundre, the Rumbuchek, Ta Jerem Dajek Gone, Tatepa, Torianda, Samas Gone, Jerem Gum, Tended, Ndreteke, Rumbuchek, Jerem Tele, Hatsa, Sala, Korotapa, Yopaji Gum, Chuk Jerem Tele, in the Yagamandu, soon as Ndreteke Lam, Jerem Chute, Tendete, Rumbuchi, Handache Lane. 아지 단전 된대제가 되는 제름 세본 된대진도 딱군 타주단 대차 딱군 닝지에서 rumbuchi senchep shoring saraba senchep shoro들 ndete lamsan 제름도 소시 오 대가레스다 주랑 나라니 제름네 쳇바면도스 에나 닝지 요메게 쳇바테레스 줄은 닝지데도 ngal 닝지데메 모난 lokwa tam는 안데 차송바레 다 드리는 정도 주랑가 삼도 중앙 공일랑에 짠이 노바 제금면서는 켈렌제네 데데 데네 체네 감바가 곰반 통살레 데데 다협동데데 짠이 용고요 말에 pen jerem seya te setang rela ya yore jerem temba thop dengate ena jerem te tharto ku tawa te marwa ngaran so saje chembo seya chi yore wa chaje chembo so tobza che yore den tharto ku tawa te mare endu jerem seya te la temba thop mo thop ta tende yore pen thayap dongde la nganju khamdo rom bache kumjin to ba tembe nyima le jerem ha cha che yore kol dilal ha cha che jerem che chu tenge yore te 닝게 매부 좀세 진짜 차송 바래 예수고요. 근데 딜로주 데이터 니 가르치는 데 바로 때는 주대교에서는 제렘네 템바 톱나야 하정가 할랜도 주 매바래. 먼저 제렘 데데 템바고는 따와다 삼hin지 상조지 셈 당근 고를 시도 주 텐도 매나 탑착바다지 차대고요. 근데 인도 다 제렘네 템바 톱바다 고구요레데 닝게다 상조스 셈티야 고구요레스.
So it's when one practices in the generation stage, it can be quite dangerous to kind of get addicted to the form of the deity, or meditating upon oneself in the form of the deity, and just putting all of one's effort into then the stabilization of oneself in the form of the deity. To illustrate the point, I'll tell you a short story. At the time of the 6th Kamtrul Teminima, there was, in the region of eastern Tibet, a particular spirit which was known as the Triab De. So this particular spirit would go around kind of causing havoc and trouble everywhere. And it came to then Kambaga in the eastern part of Tibet. And this kind of spirit came before the previous Kamtrul Rinpoche, Teminima, and kind of revealed itself. At which point Kamtrul Rinpoche saw the appearance of a deity with all the kind of the hand implements and all the details kind of very fine and in a very blazing and kind of magnificent way. At which point then he said, oh wow, your practice of the kind of generation stage is really something impressive. It's much better than mine. And at which point he kind of shed a tear. At which point then the kind of spirit replied to him, then it's true that perhaps our practice of the generation stage is similar. I wouldn't say that mine is better, but perhaps it is similar. But the reason why you are such a great Lama is because you have a correct view, and within that then you have great compassion for all others. As for me, I had no compassion, I rather had a selfish motivation and a wrong view, the wrong view being then the kind of addiction to oneself in the form of the deity. And when I perish now, I'm born as this kind of havoc-wreaking spirit. So at which point he then pledged not to harm anyone in the Kamagar region of eastern Tibet and kind of moved away. So here the point of the story is to illustrate that just achieving stability in the generation stage practice is not the end of the path in and of itself. Rather, the end of the path is then the practice of the Great Seal or Mahamudra, but stability in the generation stage practice is a means of getting towards that or progressing towards that. So as such then, if one has this kind of stability in the generation stage, then great. If one doesn't have it, one has a semblance thereof perhaps, then this is also fine, because remember then that the ultimate kind of destination of our spiritual practice then is the Great Seal. So if one finds oneself getting addicted to the meditation on deity yoga, meditating on oneself as a deity, it's perhaps useful to recall these kind of stories, recalling then the kind of faults of becoming kind of overly obsessed with meditating upon oneself as divinity.
다 지런지 고르데 된단다지 제난득 사례 다 숨바데 무구다 대박을 본다데네 라마 꾸지 강들라 무구지 녀마 마시나 선랍지 추지 문정배 지 무근들라 nenten조 세레 마란초 자벨라마 도진창네 뜰나로 단다랑 자벨라마라 토크 바데 라마다자 탐지 추글롱구 쭈궁오니고 꾸지그랑지나지 차데요레 꾸지그 강르나신다지 차데요레서 벨라 쳇데서나 강르 첨보지 요나 델라 강르 델라 니마샤요나 니메 드르데게 강데 쉬네 소 탐친이 추오고 준바고요레 추데 되니 저신 로도 나차지고요레 메그 동구요레 투제고요레 마란조 가른 돈돈라데 제네 추데게 또 준이 용구요레 베데이전도 마란조 자벨라마타조 베노 굽지가 강르나신다지레 굽지가 강르리 추요레데 마란조 대바다 무기데 자니 메바이나 선랍그 추준데 맞토고요 말에 텔라메 좀 말에 마란조 대바다 무기 메베 좀 생게 단다 선랍 만주바다 또가 메제바다 저 가르레서는 마란조 그 의네 만종바래 빼나 잡부 카 장는 된 데바지라 니마샤그 말아와 아 니마 독자고 날라 샤르그만 도선나 까 니마라 초당 당야 요 말아 쿠란 그 쭌데 잡부 카 상텔레 니마샤베 두 가두야 요 말에 니마데 그런 찬염도 강갈라 샤그 요레다 잡부 카 상는 때발 샤그 요 말에 라마라 진랍 요레 독제 요레 무그 요레 마조다 틀레 요레 때 나란주고 야 라마르 무기제 대바제 손데 몰람 제고거마도 라메 무기 들어가자 나란솔 지제 칼마라나 오토매틱 제네 들어가자 랑지게 주탐다데 짜니요 말에 텐데인데 라마 꾸지 강르라 무기지 녀마 마셔나 선랍지 추준 문종배 지 무근들라 낸텐조 먼저 가지오빠 무기글람 대바글람 텐데로와 데 무기데 시다 같이 모인 사레스.
So moving on to the third outline, which is then the practice of having faith and devotion to one's spiritual teacher, there is an analogy given where one's spiritual master is likened to then a snow mountain. And this snow mountain is called then the mountain of the four Buddha bodies, or the four kayas. Now if one would like to receive the kind of water from that, the kind of stream of blessing, if you will, then one needs the warmth of the sun to melt then the kind of the snow, allowing then the stream of blessing to then kind of come forth. So in the same way then, if one's spiritual teacher, who is indivisible then from the lineage masters, Naropa, Tilopa and what have you, this individual then is somebody who has kind of great compassion for others and has the ability to kind of liberate sentient beings. However, then one needs the condition of then the kind of the warmth of the sun in order to melt then the kind of blessing of the four kayas, allowing then the stream of the kind of blessings then to kind of come forth from one. So here, the blessing of one's spiritual masters is always present, just like the snow on top of the mountain, it's ever present. However, if one would like to receive it, then one needs to put oneself in a position where one is able to receive that blessing of one's spiritual master, and therefore then the lineage masters, etc. So the condition which allows this to occur then is this faith and devotion, and supplicating then one's spiritual teacher. For example, if one would like to receive the warm sun rays of the sun